In December 2019, a 16-year-old girl walked out of her family home in Leon, Guanajuato, Mexico, with a simple purpose in mind. She intended to enroll at the local high school, a routine errand on an ordinary Tuesday morning. She left her quiet residential neighborhood just before noon. She never returned. 9 days later, investigators discovered human remains in an abandoned lot on the outskirts of the city. The body had been burned extensively, making identification difficult. What began as a missing person case had transformed into a homicide investigation. The victim was the same teenage girl who had disappeared while running that simple errand. The confession that eventually came would reveal a pattern of behavior that had gone unnoticed for years. It would expose failures within the system designed to protect the vulnerable, and it would demonstrate how rejection, when met by someone incapable of accepting it, can turn fatal. This is the case of Dulce Ivana Nunes Martinez. Case background: Dulce Ivana Nunes Martinez was born on November 2, 2003, in Leon, Guanajuato. Her birth date coincided with Dia de los Muertos, the day of the data significant Mexican holiday honoring deceased loved ones. The timing would later carry an unintended tragic symbolism. She grew up in a stable household with her parents and her sister, Anna. Those who knew her described a cheerful, well-mannered teenager who maintained close relationships with her family. She was not considered rebellious or problematic. Friends and relatives remembered her expressing ambitions for her education and future. She wanted to make a meaningful contribution to society. On November 2, 2019, Dulce celebrated her 16th birthday. The family gathered for what they believed would be the first of many milestone celebrations. They had no indication it would be the last birthday they would spend together. Just over 1 month later, on December 10, 2019, Dulce informed her family that she planned to visit the local high school to complete her enrollment. She departed from their home in the Villa del Sol neighborhood at approximately 11:30 in the morning. The area was considered safe and quiet. She was familiar with the route. She was expected to return within a reasonable time frame. When hours passed without contact, her family grew concerned. This behavior was inconsistent with Dulce's established patterns. She typically maintained communication with her parents and sister, particularly regarding her whereabouts and estimated return times. Crime discovery: by the evening of December 10, Dulce had not returned home. She was not responding to phone calls or text messages. Her family immediately began reaching out to her social circle and posting information on social media platforms, hoping someone had seen her or knew her location. The following morning, Anna, Dulce's sister, went to the local police station to file an official missing person report. Their parents were unable to take time away from work immediately, so Anna took responsibility for initiating the formal process. The response she received was dismissive. Officers suggested that Dulce had likely run away with a boyfriend and would return voluntarily. Anna insisted this explanation was incorrect. Dulce was not involved in a romantic relationship and would not disappear without informing her family. The authorities offered alternative theories. Perhaps she had taken a spontaneous trip to the beach, or needed time alone. No immediate action was taken. No Amber Alert was issued. No search efforts were organized. For 8 consecutive days, Anna returned to the police station, requesting that an Amber Alert be activated and a formal search be initiated. Each time, her requests were denied or postponed. The authorities maintained that Dulce would likely return on her own. Unable to rely on official assistance, the family took independent action. They created and distributed missing person flyers throughout the neighborhood and across social media. The flyers included a description of Dulce's last known clothing: a mustard-colored shirt, black jacket, light blue jeans, and dark gray Puma sneakers. They also noted 3 tattoos on her left hand as identifying features. Despite these efforts, no credible tips emerged during that first week. On December 8, 8 days after Dulce disappeared, authorities finally issued an Amber Alert at approximately 4 p.m. By that time, it was already too late. The following day, December 9th, investigators discovered human remains in an abandoned lot just outside Leon. The body was unclothed and severely burned, making visual identification impossible. Through DNA analysis and a bracelet that had survived the fire, authorities confirmed the victim's identity. It was Dulce Ivana Nunes Martinez. She had been missing for 9 days. For 8 of those 9 days, law enforcement had refused to conduct a meaningful search. Investigation following the discovery of Dulce's body. Investigators faced the challenge of determining what had happened during the hours after she left home on December 10th. The condition of the remains complicated the forensic examination. The extensive burning had destroyed potential evidence. The case remained unsolved until December 21st, when a significant development occurred. A man entered the police station and provided information that would change the direction of the investigation entirely. The individual was the father of a young man named Antonio Salvador Plasencia, known by the nickname Chava. According to this father, his son had confessed to killing Dulce. He claimed that Antonio had admitted to the crime and had requested assistance in burying the body. The father stated he had declined to help but now felt compelled to report what he knew. This confession immediately shifted investigative focus to Antonio Salvador Plasencia. Authorities learned that he and Dulce were acquaintances. In fact, Antonio had posted photographs of himself with Dulce on social media on December 10, the day she disappeared. According to the developing timeline, Antonio had offered to accompany Dulce to the high school for her enrollment. She had accepted, seeing no reason to decline assistance from someone she considered a friend. However, shortly after providing this information, Antonio's father began retracting his statement. He became uncooperative with investigators and eventually withdrew his confession entirely. His motivation for this reversal was never clearly established. Ana, Dulce's sister, would later express frustration with this development, noting that the retraction complicated the prosecution's case and raised questions about whether the father might have had some involvement himself. Despite the father's retraction, investigators continued building their case against Antonio Plasencia. The evidence against Antonio Salvador Plasencia was largely circumstantial, but formed a consistent pattern. First, there was documented proof that Antonio had been with Dulce on the day she disappeared. The social media posts he had published showed them together that morning. This placed him with her during the critical time frame. Second, there was the initial confession he had made to his father. Although the father later retracted his statement to authorities, the fact remained that he had initially come forward with specific details about his son's admission of guilt, including the claim that Antonio had requested help disposing of the body. Third, Antonio had confirmed to police the location where Dulce's body was found. This knowledge suggested direct involvement in the crime scene. Fourth, investigators uncovered a disturbing pattern in Antonio's behavior toward young women. A review of his social media accounts revealed that he had nearly 4,000 Facebook connections, predominantly young females with whom he had attempted to establish romantic relationships. Multiple women came forward after Antonio's name appeared in news reports. They shared screenshots of messages he had sent them, messages that followed a troubling pattern. Antonio would initiate contact by offering compliments and friendly conversation. When these overtures were ignored or rejected, his tone would shift dramatically. He would begin sending insults, threats, and in some cases, explicit images. One woman shared a message in which Antonio had written, "When you end up lying on the side of the road, not even the dogs will eat you." This was sent simply because she had not responded to his initial messages. Another woman reported that after blocking him, Antonio created additional accounts to continue harassing her, threatening to disfigure her pretty face if he encountered her in public. Friends of Dulce confirmed to investigators that Antonio had repeatedly attempted to establish a romantic relationship with her. Each time Dulce had declined politely, stating she preferred to remain friends. Ana recalled having some reservations about the friendship. Antonio was older than Dulce and was known to use drugs but had not considered him an immediate danger. He occasionally brought food and small gifts to Dulce, which had seemed like friendly gestures at the time. Antonio's online behavior and his history of threatening women when rejected established a clear motive. Investigators theorized that when Dulce once again refused his advances, Antonio became violent. The forensic evidence suggested that Dulce had been sexually assaulted before being killed. Her body was then burned, likely in an attempt to destroy DNA evidence and prevent identification. The perpetrator appeared to have left the remains in the abandoned lot with the intention of returning later to bury them. But that plan was interrupted when Antonio confessed to his father. Suspects Antonio Salvador Plasencia became the sole focus of the investigation. There were no other credible suspects identified. He was taken into custody and charged with femicide, a term used in Mexican law to describe the gender-based killing of women. The charge acknowledges the specific nature of violence directed at women because of their gender. However, the prosecution faced significant challenges. The extensive burning of Dulce's body had destroyed much of the physical evidence that might have definitively proven Antonio's guilt. While the circumstantial evidence was compelling, the lack of forensic material created legal complications. As the case moved through the judicial system, Antonio's charge was modified. Instead of being prosecuted as the principal perpetrator of femicide, his legal status was changed to that of a participant. This distinction would have profound implications for sentencing, court, and legal proceedings. The legal proceedings in Dulce's case were marked by repeated delays and frustrations for her family. In the immediate aftermath of her death, the family encountered additional obstacles from authorities. After Dulce's body was discovered on December 19, the family requested its release so they could hold funeral services. In Mexican culture, funerals typically occur within 1 or 2 days of death. However, authorities did not release Dulce's remains until 8 days later, December 27. The funeral was held with traditional elements: pink, yellow, and white flowers, balloons, and music. A mariachi band performed outside while the song Dios Nunca Muere by Pepe Aguilar, one of Dulce's favorites, was played. Friends carried white balloons and roses to the cemetery. As the hearse arrived, they formed a line and applauded as the coffin passed. At the gravesite, balloons were released into the sky. Mourners sang, "Don't Cry for Me," I'm in a place full of light and peace, where there is no cruelty, where I can rest. Following the funeral, the judicial process began. It would last 3 years. During this time, hearings were repeatedly postponed. The defense employed various delay tactics. Dulce's family attended court proceedings regularly, seeking justice and accountability. They also organized public demonstrations to ensure the case remained visible and did not become another unsolved file. The family's efforts included participating in commemorative events. On what would have been Dulce's 17th birthday on November 2, 2020, Anna chose not to hold a birthday celebration. Instead, she created a Data Los Muertos altar honoring her sister. The altar included flowers, candles, photographs, and Dulce's favorite foods. Anna participated in a collective initiative with 40 other families who had lost women to violence, creating altars for victims of femicide. Throughout the 3-year legal process, the family lived with uncertainty and the fear that Antonio might be released without adequate punishment. In March 2022, Antonio Salvador Plasencia was finally sentenced. The outcome was deeply disappointing to Dulce's family and to those who had followed the case. Antonio received a sentence of 5 years in prison. 5 years for sexually assaulting a 16-year-old girl. 5 years for ending her life. 5 years for burning her body and abandoning it in an empty lot. The reduced sentence was attributed to the modification of charges from principal, perpetrator, to participant, and to the lack of physical evidence due to the burning of the body. The legal technicalities that had weakened the prosecution's case resulted in what many viewed as an inadequate punishment. Anna expressed her family's devastation, stating that Antonio would likely reoffend after his release, particularly given his father's financial resources to hire attorneys and the permissive nature of the legal system. Unanswered questions. Several aspects of this case remain troubling and unresolved. The role of Antonio's father continues to raise questions. Why did he initially turn in his son, providing a detailed confession, only to retract it shortly afterward? Was his retraction motivated by family loyalty, or was there a more complex explanation? Did he have any direct involvement in the disposal of evidence or the cover-up? These questions were never definitively answered. The adequacy of the police response remains deeply problematic. Why did authorities refuse to take Dulce's disappearance seriously for 8 critical days? What assumptions led them to dismiss a 16-year-old girl's disappearance as a voluntary runaway situation? How many hours of investigative opportunity were lost due to this delay? Could Dulce have been found alive if the search had begun immediately? The community response also raises concerns. Why did some individuals choose to support Antonio Plasencia publicly after his arrest? What motivated people to create social media groups defending him? Why were there individuals who engaged in victim blaming or made derogatory comments about Dulce? What does this reveal about attitudes toward violence against women in certain segments of society? The legal outcome prompts perhaps the most significant question: is 5 years an appropriate sentence for this crime? Does this punishment serve as a deterrent? Does it provide justice to the victim's family? What message does this send about the value of a young woman's life? Finally, there is the broader systemic question: how many other young women face similar harassment and threats without intervention? How many cases like Dulce's could be prevented if patterns of threatening behavior were taken seriously before they escalated to violence? Final reflection: Dulce Ivana Núñez Martinez was 16 years old when her life ended. She was a daughter, a sister, and a young person with educational aspirations and plans for her future. She did nothing to provoke or deserve what happened to her. On December 10, 2019, she informed her family of her destination. She left her home in daylight from a safe neighborhood. She was not engaging in risky behavior. She accepted the company of someone she had identified as a friend. She trusted that person. When she disappeared, her family acted immediately. They reported her missing within hours. They created flyers, utilized social media, and exhausted every personal resource available to them. They did everything correctly. The system failed Dulce at multiple points. Law enforcement failed by dismissing her disappearance for 8 days based on unfounded assumptions. The judicial system failed by reducing charges and imposing a sentence that many view as grossly inadequate. Society failed when individuals chose to defend the perpetrator and blame the victim. Anna, Dulce's sister, has transformed her grief into advocacy. She has joined collectives supporting families of missing and murdered women. She participates in protests and public demonstrations. Each year, she helps create Data Los Muertos altars honoring women whose cases might otherwise be forgotten. She works to ensure that her sister's name, and the names of other victims, remain present in public consciousness. The case of Dulce Ivana Núñez Martinez illustrates a pattern that appears with disturbing frequency: violence perpetrated by men who cannot accept romantic rejection. This pattern is not unique to Mexico, nor to any single country or culture. It is a global phenomenon that crosses geographic, economic, and social boundaries. The warning signs are often visible before tragedy occurs. In Antonio Plasencia's case, multiple women had experienced his threatening behavior. Screenshots of his messages existed. A pattern was documented, yet no intervention occurred until after Dulce was killed. This raises an uncomfortable question for society. At what point do we recognize threatening behavior toward women as a serious precursor to violence rather than dismissing it as harmless or exaggerated? When do we stop treating harassment as a personal problem and start recognizing it as a public safety issue? Dulce's case also exposes the gap between reporting a crime and receiving justice. Her family did everything they were supposed to do. They engaged with law enforcement immediately. They cooperated fully with the investigation. They attended every court hearing. They advocated publicly for accountability. Despite all this, the outcome was a 5-year sentence that many consider inadequate. This creates a reasonable concern, if even cases with confessions, witnesses, and documented patterns of threatening behavior result in minimal punishment. What message does this send to potential perpetrators? What assurance does this provide to potential victims or their families? As of the time of this documentation, Antonio Salvador Plasencia remains incarcerated, serving his 5-year sentence. Upon his release, he will re-enter society. The concerns expressed by Dulce's family that he may reoffend are not unfounded. Individuals who commit violence against women, when rejected, often maintain the same inability to accept rejection after incarceration. The lasting legacy of this case should not be limited to the tragedy itself. It should include recognition of systemic failures, acknowledgement of patterns that precede violence, and commitment to intervention before another family experiences what Dulce's family has endured. The question that remains is not simply what happened to Dulce Ivana Nunes Martinez. We know what happened. The question is, what are we prepared to change to ensure it does not happen again? That question remains unanswered.